There are names that sound like promises, and then there are names that hide a wound. Utopia Planitia. Say it slowly and it feels like a sanctuary, a tranquil plain, a final refuge beneath a quiet sky. From Earth, Mars has always encouraged that lie. It hangs above us like a red relic, beautiful in its stillness, noble in its silence, as if time itself had chosen to preserve it. A dead twin, a frozen monument, a world already judged, already buried, already understood. But some graves do not stay sealed, because in that place called Utopia, on a world we were so certain had gone cold forever, a Chinese rover touched the dust and found traces that should not have been there. Not a body, not a fossil, not a moving thing. Something worse for the imagination. Evidence, water-written evidence, the kind that suggests the silence of Mars may not be silence at all. For ages, humanity has looked at Mars and mistaken distance for peace. We saw crimson deserts and imagined a planet that had finished dying. But Mars was never peaceful. It was gutted, stripped, its atmosphere torn away over immense spans of time by solar wind and radiation, until what may once have held rivers, lakes, perhaps even long-lived habitable environments, became a frigid ruin where liquid water cannot remain stable on the open surface. Mars is not a still life. Mars is the aftermath of an assault so complete that the victim was left standing. That is the first mask we have to tear away. The postcard is false, the beauty is false, the serenity is false. Up close, this planet is hostile in ways that feel personal. The air is too thin to protect. The cold is not merely cold, it is exclusion. Radiation falls onto the surface like an invisible verdict. The dust is electrostatic, invasive, patient. And the water, if it still exists in any useful form, does not rest in open lakes under a forgiving sun. It hides. It hardens into minerals. It retreats into brines. It buries itself beneath rock and poisoned soil like an animal fleeing a fire. And this is where the mystery darkens. Because Zhurong did not arrive in Utopia Planitia to admire the landscape. It arrived like a listener entering a sealed room. A machine with the patience to hear what the ground had been refusing to say for billions of years. Its wheels crossed a place that looked empty. Its instruments insisted otherwise. Beneath the oxidized skin of Mars, Zhurong found hydrated minerals, sulfate and silica signatures, bright-toned crusts, fractured slabs, the chemical fingerprints of water's touch. Not ancient myth water from the planet's childhood alone, but signs that water-related activity may have endured far later than many had expected. This is how the planet confesses, not with speech, with residue. A bright-toned rock becomes a witness. A crust becomes a scar. A mineral becomes a memory too stubborn to vanish. In the language of science, these are hydrated sulfate and silica materials associated with local duricrust. In the language of dread, they are the dried remains of an encounter that should have been impossible on modern Mars. Something wet touched this place, something flowed, or seeped, or rose from below. And the cursed plane kept the record. That alone would be remarkable, yet the deeper revelation lies below. Zhurong carried ground-penetrating radar, an instrument less like a camera than an interrogation lamp. It peered under the surface and found buried polygonal wedges, structures 35 to 65 meters down, spread through subsurface layers of Utopia Planitia. On Earth, such patterns evoke permafrost, freeze-thaw cycles, ground that cracked and shifted as ice and moisture moved through it. On Mars, at those latitudes, they whisper something unsettling. This world may have undergone hidden cycles of water and ice long after we assumed its vital systems were dead. Mars was not simply cooling into a corpse, it was remembering how to pulse. That is the impossible physics at the center of the story. Not that Mars once had water, we have known that for years. Riverbeds do not lie. Delta fans do not lie. Mineralogy does not lie. The shock is timing, persistence. The possibility that on a planet now defined by desolation, habitable conditions may have flickered on far later than the old narrative allowed. Not a stable paradise. Not a second Earth, something stranger, a wounded world producing brief, hidden sanctuaries under the pressure of cold, salt, burial, and time. And if this descent into silence is the kind of journey you were meant to find, stay with us. Subscribe, not for noise, not for spectacle, but for the worlds that do not yield their secrets easily. Some mysteries only open for those willing to keep walking after the light begins to fail, because Mars does not reveal one secret without showing the wound that surrounds it. This planet has known catastrophe on a planetary scale. NASA's MAVEN mission showed that the solar wind and radiation stripped away most of Mars's atmosphere, taking with it the pressure and warmth required for surface water to endure. What remained was a world of transient possibilities: salty water, brief melting, locked ice, rare oases, a climate pushed toward extremity, and over all of it, the dust. Those storms that rise continent-wide, sometimes planet-wide, blackening the sky, smothering sunlight, coating machinery, darkening entire operations until rovers are forced into survival mode, like animals waiting out winter under the soil. Mars does not kill quickly, it erases slowly. That is why Utopia Planitia is such a perfect trap for the imagination. The name suggests paradise. The geology suggests a shoreline. Studies of the region describe evidence consistent with an ancient near-shore zone, a place that may once have been connected to shallow marine environments with sedimentary deposits and water-related lamination features marking the boundary between land and a vanished sea. Think of that for a moment. A beach on Mars, a coast, a place where familiar Earth-like logic should comfort us. It does not. Because this coast lies under a dead atmosphere and a poisoned sky. It is not a beach. It is the chalk outline of an ocean. This is what makes Mars feel less like a planet and more like a villain. It lures us with resemblance, shorelines, seasons, dust devils, polar caps, valleys. It wears the vocabulary of life while denying life the conditions it needs. It stages echoes of Earth in a theater of extinction. It shows us places that look almost habitable, almost intimate, almost forgiving, then reminds us that every familiar contour is wrapped in lethal chemistry, cold and radiation. However, caution matters here. China did not find confirmed life on Mars. No microbe has been seen moving in the dust. No organism has been lifted into the light. Zhurong found conditions, clues, a stronger case that water-related processes persisted. A stronger case that buried refuges may have existed. A stronger case that habitability on Mars did not vanish in one clean, ancient moment. That distinction is everything, because the most terrifying discoveries are often not the answer itself, but the sudden realization that the answer remained possible much longer than we dared to believe. So where would hope hide on a planet like this? Not in sunlight, not on open plains, not in exposed valleys beneath ultraviolet fire. Hope would retreat downward, into hydrated duricrusts, into ice-rich layers, into buried polygonal ground, into brines kept liquid by salt and pressure, into pockets where water met rock in darkness, shielded from the sterilizing violence above. NASA itself has noted that as Mars cooled and dried, any microbial life that once survived near the surface could have been driven underground or forced into rare surface oases. In other words, if Mars protected life at all, it did so the way a tomb protects a relic, by hiding it from the sky. And Zhurong was not the first to question the dead. In 1976, Viking 2 also descended into Utopia Planitia because the site seemed to offer a better chance of finding signs of life. It touched the surface of Mars and carried out biology experiments that remained inconclusive, as though the planet had chosen to answer in riddles even then. Decades later, other missions would pay their own price. Schiaparelli fell after a fatal descent error, striking Mars at high speed. Storms darkened rovers, hardware was caked in dust, signal and certainty kept failing at the threshold. Mars has a history of making witnesses disappear before they finish speaking. That is why Zhurong matters beyond national pride, beyond headlines, beyond the easy drama of a discovery. It joined a long procession of machines sent into alien silence, and in that silence it found buried testimony. Not enough to close the case, enough to reopen it, enough to disturb the grave. Because if a world this broken preserved water-related activity longer than expected, then Mars is no longer just a story about loss. It becomes a story about endurance, about how life, or the conditions for life, may cling to existence in narrow, protected seams long after a planet has turned against itself. And once that possibility enters the mind, it changes more than our view of Mars. It changes the arithmetic of the cosmos. If habitability can survive in hidden episodes on a wounded world, then life may be less fragile than our fear tells us. Or perhaps more desperate, more subterranean, more tenacious. Not a miracle blooming only in ideal gardens, but a whisper learning how to live inside ruins. And yet the final warning cuts the other way. Mars is also a mirror, a preserved example of what can happen when a world loses the shield that keeps water stable and the surface merciful. The red planet may once have supported long-lived water, only to become a monument to atmospheric loss. Not just a dead neighbor, a caution written at planetary scale. Utopia Planitia is false paradise, yes, but it is also prophecy, a shoreline without a sea, a memory without a witness, a future without forgiveness. So perhaps the real mystery was never whether China found life on Mars. Perhaps the deeper mystery is why we needed Mars to remind us that worlds are mortal. That silence is not always emptiness. Sometimes it is aftermath, sometimes it is concealment. Sometimes it is a warning so old and so immense that only a machine crawling through red dust can begin to read it. And if you want to keep listening to these haunted worlds with us, subscribe and return. Because out there, in the cold between stars, the universe rarely screams. It whispers, and the ones who lean closer are the ones who hear it first.